Okay, so we have debated how we were going to do this show for a while. So I have had Catherine on, I have had Mark on, Mark and Catherine have had me on, but we've never gotten the four of us together because our schedules are so opposite with you guys being in the UK. So Rob's usually working when I'm off. So
Mhm.
so we had to figure out a day where all four of us could get together. It just happens to be a Saturday. So then the question is, do we pre-record and release it later in the week, or do we do a live stream to both channels? So we settled on, we were going to live stream it to both channels, and then this morning we decided to just put it on our channel. So we finally settled on something, but I'm excited to have Catherine and Mark on, and Rob, you finally get to meet my friends from the UK.
Yeah, I've been on one show with Mark, but I've never been on with Catherine before. So
So welcome, guys. Yeah, we were just trying to figure out like what we were even going to talk about like up until a week before. And what we're going to do is we're going to hang out on YouTube for a while, and then we're going to probably go over to locals and discuss I would like to know about some of the backlash you guys caught over the past few months, behind the scenes and stuff like that. So we'll talk about that over on locals. But over here, first and foremost, how was everybody's Christmas? Catherine, I saw some pictures from you guys. How was your family's Christmas?
Yeah, lovely, very nice. We have my elderly father with us every year. He's 91 now and has been on his own for almost 30 years since my mum died. So he spends Christmas with us, and it's lovely. You know, it's a treasure for the kids to have his wisdom, and for them, it's wonderful seeing them help him with just little practical things like walking and dressing and eating, because they then serve, you know, and they see that the value in serving others. So it's good for them. And we had all the children. I have stepchildren, so I had my stepchildren with us as well, and that was lovely. So yeah.
Mark, you too. I saw some really nice pictures that you posted from your holiday over there.
I kind of find it a bit difficult, really. Like it's always there's a lot of spending time with people you don't really want to spend any time with, isn't there? Which is really difficult, and you have to pretend everything's great and all that sort of thing. But and you just drink too much and eat too much. So yeah, and the people I really wanted to spend it with, you know, like my oldest son and his two children, he's had two sons. Just what are they now? October they were born, so. You know, very, very tiny still, and they all went to Ireland for Christmas. So, and we've been on the, you know, FaceTime and whatever, trying to keep up with how they are.
That really is tough. Like when your kids get married and they have to split the holiday between the parents and things like that. Like, my family, I have such a big family. I have 4 brothers, 4 sisters, and I don't know when we started drinking on holidays, because we never did growing up, and we never did. Like my parents don't drink or anything, but my siblings probably like 4 or 5 years ago decided to like start bringing alcohol into the equation, and it is like a club.
You're blaming your siblings?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm part of that problem too, but I'm just it was like a club at my mom's house. My brother brought this big speaker and the kids are all dancing. It was really like a wild party, but it was Christmas Eve at my mom's house, and my wife and I had to go to midnight mass. So we were like, all right, we're not drinking. And I'm a dry drunk. Like I don't like to be around people that are drinking when I'm not drinking. I find them very annoying. So I had to tolerate a bunch of intoxicated relatives while I was sober on Christmas Eve. And then on Christmas Eve, there's a kid in my neighborhood who he's not raised in any kind of religion whatsoever. And he called my daughter and he goes, "Do you think I could come to church with you guys?" So this kid from the neighborhood, he's 15 years old, just wanted to come to church with us. And he'd never been to church. He's not Catholic. He's not. So he gets in the car and I'm like, is your mom Christian, Catholic? What is she? He goes, I think she might be Christian. I'm not really sure. So like he has absolutely no upbringing of Christianity in his life whatsoever. And his first church experience is a high Latin missa cantata midnight mass. And he comes in and he's just like, first off, if you've never been to a Latin mass, like midnight mass, when you walk in, the whole church is dark and they're just singing Christmas hymns. And it feels otherworldly. It really does. And after going through the entire liturgy, we get in the car and we're about to leave, and I'm like, oh, so what did you think? This I just said that to Rob earlier. Actually, Rob asked me, he goes, "How did the kid like it?" I go, "I'm trying to figure out if he really wanted to go to church or if he just likes my daughter. I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. But either way, I don't care. He came to church." But he was like, "Did the words in the songs mean anything?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because he didn't understand a single thing that was going on. But he said he did want to go again, so we'll probably have him come again. But I told people I don't typically overtly evangelize anyone, but everyone in our lives know that we go to church every Sunday. If they come to my house, there are icons and statues and crucifixes all over the place. They all know that my family goes to mass every Sunday, and that alone, like just living a Catholic life, is enough of a witness that when people have questions, they know to come to us and they ask us things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best form of evangelization, I think, sometimes, isn't it? Is if people, are attracted to the family that that you live in, then, and they're like, they want to know. Well, I've had that so many times. Oh, how come your kids are all so great, or whatever? How do you do that? And I always say, well, we're Catholic. That's it.
Yeah.
Figure it out.
Yeah, like half of my son's friends, I would say maybe even more than half. There's a group of kids that my son hangs out with, and they all are drawn to my home and my family because they see stability here. And most of them come from these broken homes where the father took off and married some other woman, or they never even knew their father, things like that. And then they come to our home, and our home is like we're sitting down and having dinner together every night and saying prayer before meals, things like that. And they're just drawn to it. And it really is like one of the best tools for evangelization is just living like a cohesive Catholic life in front of your neighbors.
It's interesting that fatherhood features so centrally in it as well, isn't it? And like you put your finger on it when you said that so many of the problems that we observe in society around us is broken homes. That's really where it sort of all comes from. And there were some amazing stats in the UK. I don't know if it was a worldwide study, but that, like, if the mum practices Catholicism, there's a 40% chance that the kids will. But if the dad practices, it's like 80%. Even if the mum doesn't, and that is true to what we always think, that it's the man, it's the head of the family, isn't it? And you need that. So maybe this kid is just he's recognised that the way in, that there's no way, if he's gonna go out with your daughter, then he's just got to convert. That's it.
Well, that would be like the bare minimum starting point, right? What I also wanted to ask you guys, like, what is it like viewing American media from the UK? Like what? Because we're all kind of in, with Twitter especially now, we're all kind of in like the same media realm these days, where it was never like that before. So you guys would kind of have like this outsider's point of view into American politics, but now with Twitter, it seems like we're all talking about the same things. Like, do you guys still have like a very like I'm trying to think how to word this, but when you look upon the US, is it drastically different from your own culture?
Yeah, me and Catherine often talk about this. It's like your excited children. That's how it comes across to us. All the news programs are all like really loud music and people screaming, "Oh yeah, this is going on." And
that's exactly what Anthony's like.
This is the news, So it is really, I think it is really different. And everywhere is there's so much hyperbole. Everything in America is someone's trying to sell you a point of view. And I think there's certainly a bit of that goes on in the UK, but it's much more, they're trying to enlighten you, albeit from a certain perspective sometimes. Wouldn't you say, Catherine?
Yes. I think over here so our BBC, which is our national broadcaster, would have been very comfortable with Biden as president. And so America was presented as very reasonable and everything was positive. And now Trump's got in, everything is
chaos.
He's a crazy man. Look at all these terrible things he's done. He's a conspiracy theorist. Isn't it all terrible? So if you're still beholden to that national broadcaster, I think you can't help but have your view of America swayed by that presentation. But I think a lot of people, as you say, with Twitter and expanding new media, I think people, it tends to be a generation dying out that are still buying into that, I think.
And what is because from the US, when we look upon the UK, it can seem like there's kind of a narrative going that you guys are totally finished at this point because you've been completely invaded by Islam. Like, is there still a Christian ethos in the UK, or is it completely secular and now being, taken over by whatever immigration policies you guys have? Do you still have a Christian ethos in England?
Yeah, I think we've seen a resurgence in the last 12 months or so, definitely. But like, this is a narrative that you hear played out, and obviously I interact with you guys. I've got lots of friends in America who I love, and Catherine and I both have got lots of American friends, and there's this constant repetition of this narrative that England's been taken over by Muslims or whatever. But the reality is that there is 6%. That's how many. That's the population. There is definitely a majority of normal English people who aren't even aware of anything like that. I mean, even Father Charles Muir on Joe McLean's program, yeah, like a few days ago was saying, oh, there are places in England you can't go because of Sharia law. It's all that's complete nonsense. It's definitely not. We live in those places. Catherine lives in the middle of one of those places, like, if you like, but we don't. It's just there in the the areas of London and the big cities, Birmingham and stuff like that. There's an intensity of that demographic, let's say, but there has always been waves of immigration, especially in London. Like I'm a second generation Irish immigrant, so our lot all moved in, and then they all move out to Ilford or whatever, like a little bit outside. And that's the way the waves have always sort of moved, and we're just in this wave now of there's a lot more African. We see a lot more African faces at mass and stuff like that. So
it's funny because of the way the media portrays things, right? So I remember even when like the George Floyd stuff was happening, like I'm sure in Minneapolis where Rob is, it was pretty crazy during that time.
Well, I'm not in Minneapolis.
Yeah, it's your
get
neck
over
of
that.
So it's close enough to you. Rob's not like in Minneapolis, but I'm sure it was
250 miles away from Minneapolis.
That's like the whole length of Britain, mate.
So, but even during like the riots in New York during that whole George Floyd thing, remember like when they were doing the BLM protests and in New York, if you watch the news, you would think all of New York was on fire. And meanwhile, it was really just in this like concentration of like 3 or 4 blocks where everywhere else in New York was totally fine. But the way things are portrayed in the media will have you thinking all of America is on fire from these couple of protests that were going on. Don't get me wrong, they were horrific and they definitely destroyed segments of these cities, but it wasn't like the entire country was on fire. Most people didn't even pay attention to what was going on. So we are definitely like inflamed by the media we consume, and you can have this impression that the whole world is melting apart. And then in your day-to-day life, you go and meet people and people are pretty normal and everything's kind of, if you turn the internet off, it's really not as crazy as we're being led to believe.
And that's intentional, that division. And it's not to say that there isn't a reality about this. Although the percentages are still small, Islam is a threat, an increasing threat in the UK. But it's a threat where it's a supernatural end. You have to there's a supernatural solution. And I think the problem with what I see with a lot of the discussion around immigration is you would expect this, right? You would expect this. We are a Christian nation and we have just given up. We have just gone away. We have just left Christ. We have just turned to all sorts of things. We've elevated ourselves. We've got pagan worship, and we think that that's fine, do we? We think that we can just do that and expect there to be no consequences. So if we're saying, yeah, we're losing our identity, we're losing who we are, our country's being flooded, and we're in danger, let's fight. If we don't see that the fight is supernatural and that the solution is supernatural, then it's no good who you vote in or how many swords you have in your hand waving them about. We have to recognize that we have to turn back to Christ. And so, yeah, there is a problem. It's not, like Mark said, it's overblown. But it should wake us up.
It's one thing I've always loved about the story of like the military orders, in the Crusades, is that you had these men who recognized that there was both a worldly physical solution as well as a supernatural spiritual solution. They were willing to fight both with prayer and fasting, as well as with the sword if and when necessary. And I think too often in our world we usually concentrate just on the physical and not on the spiritual and supernatural, when we really need to work on both.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, by the way. I'm not saying, there's no place for actual fighting. But if it's outside of Christ, if it's fighting under our own strength, then it's not going to achieve what we hope it to achieve. And what we do see quite well publicized in the UK are a lot of high-profile people becoming culturally Christian, saying Christianity, we've just worked out, is quite useful. And it's a useful tool to achieve human ends. And if it's only ever utilized in this way and not participated in and lived, then that's problematic, and that there's a blindness there. So it's great to celebrate, yeah, Christians, yeah, we're singing carols. But if we're doing it just to say, stuff you Muslims, without anything behind it, then that ain't the answer.
Yeah, you saw Richard Dawkins recently? That clip was going around of him talking about how he was lamenting the loss of Christian culture. And it's like, man, this guy actually was such an instrumental figure in getting rid of that Christian culture with his the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse or something, whatever the heck, that like the new atheist movement, that he was so much behind getting people to view the Christian things that we did as just superstition, and how ridiculous the things were that we believed. And he set in motion this generation of people who tried to chuck off the beautiful traditions they were given and make it like they were just silly superstition. And now he's seeing that you can't actually get rid of religion. Like, you'll just replace it. So if you get rid of your Christian religion, what's going to replace it is going to be either Islam, or it's going to be that insane stuff that we saw over the past few years with the secular religion, where people were trying to make like trans sacred, like the weird imagery around the halos over George Floyd, and the making trans people, like there was this weird attempt to like Christianize this stuff. It was very bizarre. And he had such a big part in bringing this stuff about. And then all of a sudden he's looking in hindsight going, oh no, what have I done?
Well, and that is Chesterton's fence, isn't it? And Catherine had real experience of that when she was growing up. And there was no framework to push back against it. And this is what, when I was studying Islam, I used to do a lot of martial arts, and there were loads of Muslim guys who were in our martial arts class. And so we'd get into theological discussions, and it became obvious that they really looked down on, white Western people. Like, you've heard about the Pakistani grooming gangs, and this is how it works, existentially, really, because they see us as people without morals, as people without principles. We've abandoned our principles, and we don't believe in anything, as Catherine said. And so, and when I initially was sort of got involved with studying Islam, this was the big revelation to me, was we've got no ideology to push back with. That's why we're in this problem, and now you see that, which interests me as we go forward, that people are turning more to Christianity. And you saw it, to answer your initial question again, in the King's speech on Christmas Day this year, where it was the most overtly Christian, delivery that we've had for decades in this country. And that really interests me that they're looking for some framework, because, like Chesterton's fence says, don't remove the fence until you know what it was put up for in the first place. And that's what Dawkins precisely was doing, wasn't it? Whatever it was rubbish. So let's take it down, and with no idea of what's going to replace it, or the fact that the structure is actually important. And now, so this leads us to a position where we've got this utilitarian kind of Christianity, where people are adopting Christianity as some sort of framework because they recognize that the framework has got some benefit. But unless there's a supernatural dimension to it, it's not going to really get us anywhere, is it?
Okay, so I sent Rob an article because this Politico article was very interesting. Rob, you could pop it up. I wanted you guys to see this. So, how the far right stole Christmas, which is such a so many things you can pick apart in this article. So, seasonal traditions and good cheer are being repurposed to serve political ends. Rome. Christmas is becoming a new front line in Europe's culture wars. Far-right parties are claiming the festive season as their own, recasting Christmas as a marker of Christian civilization that is under threat and positioning themselves as its last line of defense against a supposedly hostile secular left. The trope echoes a familiar refrain across the Atlantic, was first propagated by Fox News, where hosts invade against the purported war on Christmas for years. U.S. President Donald Trump claims to have brought back the phrase Merry Christmas in the U.S., framing it as defiance against political correctness. Now, European far-right parties, more usually focused on immigration or law and order concerns, have adopted similar language, recasting Christmas as the latest battleground in a broader struggle over culture. You could drop the article. I just think that was enough because there's parts of this I actually agree with. Like we just watched a lot of the stuff go down at the TPUSA event, and you had that scene of Jack Posobiec holding up his rosary and marching forward. But at the same time, there really is a war on Christmas, right? The idea of Kwanzaa is a war against Christmas. It really is, because Kwanzaa is a made-up holiday where and Christmas really is the foundational root of Christian civilization, and it is under attack. So I'm not a fan of politicizing Christianity to wear as a skin suit. Like, to get back to what Catherine was saying, like, you can't just use this thing without there being the substance of the soul of the thing. But at the same time, these traditions actually are very important. And this introduction of Kwanzaa and even Hanukkah, yes, it is the festival of lights. Yes, it is mentioned in John's gospel, but it was never celebrated the way it is currently until the 1950s. And I can't help but think these holidays are thrown in around Christmas time in order to downplay the significance of the Incarnation and how earth-shattering the Incarnation really is, so much so that we judge time by it. And they wanted to throw these other holidays in this time period to downplay the significance of the Incarnation and just make it like it's happy holidays.
Well, and that's what everyone seems to be doing, the happy holidays thing, to neutralize it, to make it not about any religion. So you've got two things going on. You've got all this made up Kwanzaa stuff where they just make themselves look stupid, don't they, with stuff like that. But then on the other side of it, you've got this, let's remove all the religion and secularize the whole thing. And that is about diversity and equity and inclusion, isn't it? Because then everyone can enjoy it. And my youngest daughter even had this at her school, this sort of thing. But what's great about a secular school is that she gets to push back and they have to respect her position as much as else.
Well, we spoke with a young lady who works for the National Trust over here, and she was telling us, and this is typical, that they have removed Christmas and Easter from the calendar because they don't want to have any religious affiliation. They want to remain neutral, but they've put Eid in and Diwali, and they don't seem to see that there's any problem there. So rip out all the Christian ones, but stick in other religions.
Yeah, one of the weirdest things was watching the Diwali celebrations throughout America and England a few months ago, because I've never seen England have Christmas celebrations like that. I've never seen America have these big parades and fireworks for Christmas. But then Diwali comes out, and it's so new. It feels like the the Diwali thing is just came about this year in the public eye like that. I've never seen. I'd never even heard of it before this year, and then this year it just seems like it is so front and center. It was like they came into our nations quietly, and then all of a sudden they all got the call. It's like, all right, this year we're going to make ourselves known, and they came onto the world center stage with their Diwali celebrations this year. It's kind of weird. I don't know. It seemed coordinated.
Yeah, my dogs don't appreciate it. I can tell you that much because
dogs hate fireworks.
We have like Guy Fawkes, don't we? Would celebrate the attempted, the capture of the people who were trying to blow up Parliament. Guy Fawkes. I don't know if Americans are even aware.
Oh, we all know Guy Fawkes, yeah.
On the 5th of November.
Guy Fawkes, yeah.
Because of V for Vendetta, mostly.
Right, yeah, that's probably why, yeah. I always found it, growing up as a Catholic in a sort of a broadly Protestant country, you know, you'd be going around collecting penny for the guy and stuff like that. And when you learnt the history, it's like, oh, no, I probably shouldn't be doing that, really, burning an effigy of Guy Fawkes on a bonfire or whatever. But that's always like, so in November, you've got that celebration. And now Diwali's before that. So the blooming fireworks just seem to go on for, like, and we'll have it again in New Year's. And there's kids getting older fireworks and setting them off up the road. The dogs won't even go outside.
I would suggest staying away from the U.S. for 4th of July then.
Yeah. Well, I won't bring the dogs anyway.
The dogs anyways, yeah.
But you're right, Anthony. It is the incarnation, isn't it? This is, like Peter Kreeft talks about, Jesus shock. We've sort of forgotten this, how huge this is. You know, this is Christ becoming man transforms everything. And I think it's about trying to distract from that. So we should be concerned. We should be cautious. We should say, no, Christ above everything. Nothing compares. It's not comparable. It's not Christ and Diwali, Christmas and Eid, and we do have to kind of fight for Christmas. But the idea of presenting it as a political thing or a right wing thing is bizarre.
Yeah.
Well, that's what was missing from the King's speech. Really, was that, you know, I wrote an article for a Christmas post, and what always strikes me about it is the power of the incarnation at the center of history. And it's so radical that God entered into time, space and history and became a human being. You know, that affects everything. It's chirological, isn't it? You know, it affects all of time.
It essentially creates a new universe. So, and you see this, like, I've been watching this insanity from the Sola Scriptura crowd. My friends hosted a space on X recently, and they got that crazy Protestant girl Lizzie to come on. And this is my friend Lewis hosted it, and she was coming down on them for the traditions of men, you know. And he goes, "Well, do you celebrate Christmas?" And she didn't know what to say, because Christmas is not actually in the Bible as a celebration. Like, it's a tradition that was handed down. And she's like, she didn't know what to say, because she was mocking us for Lent and things like that. But now all of a sudden Christmas comes and she wants to still celebrate Christmas. But you see this push from Protestants trying to say that Christmas is actually a pagan holiday. It was, I forgot which one they say it is. Like, they say Easter was Ishtar and all these different things. But really from the beginning,
Saturnalia.
Yeah, Saturnalia. From the beginning, like, the church fathers, the reason we celebrate Christmas on December 25th is because we believe his birth prefigures his death. So his incarnation is on the same day of his death. So you have Christ dies on March 25th, so we celebrate the incarnation also on March 25th, and then 9 months later we have his birth. So that's why we celebrate it there. But it's also because it's the darkest time of the year, and Christ is the light of the world, and the light shines forth in the darkness. And modern Protestants all kind of miss that, and they think if something's not written to the letter in the Bible that it shouldn't be celebrated. You're seeing this real big push by Protestants to get rid of any kind of traditions, where traditions are what makes culture. these things that we do in like Christmas really does build culture. It absolutely is a mark of Christian civilization. So is Easter. The whole liturgical calendar is the mark of Christian civilization. And you know it's true because they're trying to make a secular liturgical calendar, and they try to replace all the Christian holidays with secular holidays because they know that's actually how the real way to undermine Christianity is to replace it with something devoid of of the Christian spirit by just throwing in all these other stupid, meaningless holidays around them. So like in America, they'll mock us for having processions with statues of Our Lady, but then they'll go and have these processions like holding up statues of George Washington. And it's like you got rid of the church fathers for the founding fathers. You no longer worship you no longer like lift up the heroes of the Christian faith. You now have like Freemasons as your heroes. And they just replaced real religion with this secular Freemasonic nonsense. And they do the same thing we do as They tried to, you saw it with Charlie Kirk. They tried to canonize Charlie Kirk before our eyes. Like they were literally like making statues of the man and asking for his intercession from heaven, essentially. And it's like, you guys are more Catholic than you even realize.
It is a big old hot mess, isn't it? You know, I've had quite a lot of dealings with the Baptist church. I do a bit of Bible study with the Baptists up there. It's like they never read the Bible. They don't know whether they're coming or going. What do you think of someone like Gavin Ortland then? Do you ever watch any of his stuff?
I've tried because I have to be on guard with the Protestant apologetics and the Catholic apologetic stuff. Like I've kind of stepped away from that world. I'm not a fan of debates, and I don't even really like so much how Catholic apologetics works these days. Like because I think it's made us all into sola scripturists in some way or another, where when Protestants come with a Bible verse, we bring a Bible verse back to combat that. And I'm not really a fan of that. I found the best way to actually convey the Catholic faith is to use history and to explain the story of how the Catholic Church conquers the pagan world. So I haven't really watched too much of Gavin Ortland. Why? What have you noticed?
Well, I just think like he is very much embedded in that world of debate and very, you know, structured and careful, and he's kind of got an answer for everything. But like there are massive holes in the way that all this is put forward, which you just said. Like, you know, I found with the Baptists that they're following a tradition, and you could point that out in any discussion. You know, that like, well, where'd you get that from? And I find that where like that sort of evangelical Christianity that you've got is really prevalent in the States and kind of bleeds over to the evangelical churches here. That is so at odds with Protestantism. You know, if they actually read anything that Martin Luther or Zwingli or Calvin or anything said, they'd be horrified. You know, like some of the stuff about Mary and, you know, like it's so far removed. It literally is like a new religion. And that is, it almost is the biggest threat that we face, I think, is that idea that there is something where it's, you know, it's like a phasmid, isn't it? It's, you know, like a stick insect is a phasmid. It pretends to be a stick. And Protestantism is like a phasmid pretending to be Catholicism. You know, it's like you don't have to follow any of the moral principles. No. Like that always fascinates me. They don't seem to bother about, like, you know, they have little chastity drives and the silver ring thing and stuff like that. But, you know, generally speaking, they don't really believe in any of that. You can get divorced, you do whatever you like, can't you? And justify it.
It usually comes down to some moral thing they disagree with. It always comes down to contraception or divorce or some kind of moral issue that they struggle with. Now, all four of us are cradle Catholics, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Rob and I, a couple months back, we were having this conversation about, well, it started with my son, where my son had heard me tell my reversion story, and we would, like, you'd hear all these Protestant conversion stories of Protestants coming into the church, and I had to like have a conversation with my son about it, because he was like, when am I going to have like this big, like this big encounter with Christ? You know what I mean? Because he's hearing everybody has their conversion story. And I'm like, it's kind of interesting for those of us raising our kids really in the faith, because they may not have one of those big conversion stories because they're raised in the faith properly. So I then heard Jonathan Peugeot and Richard Rowland discussing this topic also about American religion, and how American religion is so much intertwined with that conversion story experience, where people like live this life of sin, and then they have this encounter with Christ, and then they give their testimony. And so, because so many, especially lately, there's so many converts, and I think this started in like the 80s and 90s when you had Scott Hahn come into the church, and you had, you know, Jeff Cavins coming in, and you had all these Protestant converts who, thank God for them, because most of our catechesis comes from those Protestants who fell in love with Catholic tradition, and they came in and they were like, wait, we need to start teaching Catholics about this stuff. But then you got the Journey Home, which would have these countless Protestant pastors coming in and telling their conversion story of them becoming Catholic. And I feel like there's a very Protestant ethos that's coming into Catholicism, of everybody having to tell their testimony or tell
it was very common in like the Life Teen and Net sort of scene for teenagers. Like that's what it was. It was an older teenager telling you their testimony of how they did terrible things, and now suddenly they found, you know, Christ.
Yeah, their Saint Augustine moment, right? Like they're living these lives of debauched sin, and then they encounter, which, listen, these are beautiful things. I don't want to downplay these things. These are very beautiful. But for those of us that are kind of now, because I think a lot of that had to do with, there was this generation where the fathers didn't participate that much in raising the kids in the faith. They kind of left religion to mom, which was very much my experience. My mom was the one who brought us up in religion. My father didn't. And then I fell away from the faith because of that. And then I come back in. But I think for a lot of the young men today that are raising their families in the faith, we have to figure out a way to bring our children up without them having that conversion experience, because otherwise you have to kind of let your kids go get like mixed up in sin, right? And you don't want to have your kid go get off into this life of separation from Christ only to have that conversion experience and then come back. So it's something that we all have to figure out how to give our children, where they just have this kind of steady faith life, and it's not this roller coaster where they fall away and then come back, and that's how they really fall in love with Christ. It's something I'm trying to figure out with my own children as I'm going. And the more I watch Catholic apologetics and these reversion stories, I'm like, these are beautiful, but I think something else also needs to be brought into the conversation.
It's one of those things, like, maybe it would help to hear more stories from people who have always just been good, faithful Catholics for the most part, but those aren't exciting stories generally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They don't get views. So how do you do that? How do you make it exciting?
I don't know if you saw David Wood. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's someone who's worth following, because he does a lot of Islamic apologetics. But he was interviewed by Brian Holdsworth this week. And Brian, like, he's got quite a famous story that he did a video on it, and he did a video on it to stop people asking him, because he was he's a psychopath who tried to murder his father, and then he converted and all this sort of thing. So the first thing Brian does really is fall into that elephant trap and ask him his conversion story. And Wood is brilliant. He says, look, I don't really want to talk about that. It's much more impressive to me that you've brought up your children as Catholics to believe the faith and hold to Christ than it is for me. Oh, well, look, David fell down a hill. That's just gravity. Any idiot can do that. Any idiot can be subject to gravity. And I thought, wow, that's really refreshing to hear that perspective. How much more heroic is it if you bring up your children to live and hold to the faith? It's much more impressive than how deep the hole that you fell into was, like, in a way.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
No, sorry. I think you're quite right, but one of the dangers that I think we have to be mindful of, and in fact this goes, Anthony, to something you and I both have found very helpful, is Scott Hahn's analysis and commentary on Romans 9 to 11 and will all Israel be saved. is a hardness of heart. You know, is we have to be cautious. We can raise our children, they can be faithful, they can attend mass, but there's also a sense that don't slip into this hardness of heart, this sense that you somehow are saved because of that, and therefore there's, you know, you aren't I good and you're bad. You know, we're great, we got it, we're Catholic, we're going to mass, everything's fine. Is that we too are capable of that. We too are capable of slipping into that mindset of thinking that we don't need to worry. And whilst we might not have great rebellion story about taking drugs and prostitutes and everything, or a St. Augustine moment,
speak for yourself, Bennett.
We can don't. But whilst we might not, and I think there is value there, there's also watchfulness. We do have to be careful, and we do have to be watchful and humble ultimately.
Yeah, it's we go very quickly from being the prodigal son to the older brother, all of us, right? So you have if you have that, especially for someone like me, like I was the prodigal son, I was the wayward son. I left, I took my inheritance, and then I did have a reversion. I come back, and it's very easy to fall into that prideful state where now all of a sudden you're looking upon other people and you're like, well, you're not living this, then you're not. I'll be honest, I've been thinking about this a lot in the past couple of weeks, because I found myself judging family members and like having this very judgmental attitude towards certain family members. And I had to remind myself that, man, you were there. Like, you are the thing you're criticizing this person for, you are very much guilty of in your own life. And only because God came in and intervened in your life are you not struggling with that thing anymore. So maybe these people are dealing with those things because God's trying to make an inroad in their lives like that. It's something we constantly have to be on guard for. And especially with the going through the Romans 9 through 11, it was like the southern kingdom, because they had the temple, they were so prideful, looking down upon the 10 northern tribes because they were, performing idol worship and all this stuff, and they thought who the hell they were, because we still had the temple, and God had to humble them and destroy the temple to put them back in their place as well.
Yeah, which is merciful. Chastisement, punishment, exile are ultimately indicative of God's great love and mercy. And I think that's something we are not seeing, that Mark and I have been talking about this a lot over Christmas, is where we fail to see that. Because we live at a time where and again, this goes back to the Israelites, is we're not so bothered about trying to avoid sin as suffering. And yet, if we want to conform ourselves to Christ, it's suffering that we have to take on. It's that's how we have to be Christ-like. And so we're busy saying let's avoid suffering, but we're not busy saying let's avoid sin. And that's got to be crucial.
Yeah, and also, so the reason I wanted to name this show "How Christ Brings Light into the Darkness" is because I met both of you at the Catholic Identity Conference, not this past one, the one before that. And both of your stories struck me because they weren't reversion stories necessarily. Well, Mark's definitely was. And I think, Catherine, yours was more of it's something that brought you back. But Mark was already Catholic, and it was still Christ who kind of brought light back into one of the darkest times in your entire life. Mark, I don't know if you want to share that story now. I know it's a very heavy story, so it probably should be an entire episode devoted to it. But it's just, I had an experience for myself where I was already Catholic, going to mass every week, but there was something happening in my marriage where my wife and I, like, communication broke down between us, and it got so bad that we couldn't even talk anymore. And I remember just sitting before the crucifix and weeping and like begging God, like, you promised to set us free. Like, when are you going to actually set me free? And it didn't happen in an instant, and it didn't happen the way I thought it would. But God, from that prayer from the depth of my heart, Christ really brought light into my life. And my marriage now, compared to that moment, it's like, it was like a new marriage came forth, and my wife and I are in a better place than we had ever been. And it wasn't this big reversion story. It was more, I was already Catholic, already going through the sacraments, but it was just this really dark time in my life, and Christ's light really shone through and just broke through these chains I had over my heart and fixed my whole life for me.
Yeah, so yeah, and I think that's perfect. That's the way that it works. I mean, just look at the typology in the Bible. I was thinking of Joseph straight away. God didn't put him in charge of Egypt. He put him in a pit, didn't he? And then he put him in prison, and he had to go through all of those stages. But God is working through all of those things, as Catherine said. It's often the chastisement that we find the glory. And my story is that I built a big business and was very successful, had 4 lovely children, a perfect marriage, everything was going great. And I went out one day to take my 7-year-old daughter for a ride in a new car, and the car aquaplaned on some standing water and turned over, and she was killed. And my life ended really at that moment. It felt like that was a complete change in everything was destroyed, and that from that moment on, really, I was just waiting to die. That was kind of, but there were, I was kept alive really by my faith. It was knowing that I had 3 other little children, that I had an amazing wife, and that I had to keep going for them. I wasn't much use to them for probably 10 years after that happened. And it's still a source of incredible pain, like it was yesterday. It really is that raw. Even like last night, I was around at my sister-in-law's family, and they were playing an old video of my daughter Ruth with their daughter when she was a little baby, and like they're like, oh, isn't that lovely? And immediately the incredible agony, just comes up, and I have to look away almost. It's so painful. But through that experience, there were so many little things that happened that allowed me to survive through it, supernatural things, as well as just the way that people interacted with me, priests, but lay people, the community circled around us. I was studying theology at the time, and the connections that I made were extraordinary. Some of the people that God put in front of me at that moment were, just said the right thing, or had the right answer, or, had the right sort of discussion with me at the right moment. And it was like a trail of breadcrumbs. And I was able to, even though I literally felt like that image, I don't know if you've seen it, of the man with the hammer, and Jesus is holding him up, like, he's sort of crucified, and Christ is holding him up. And that was how I felt through all that time. And that still lives deeply inside me, that pain. But, so we had another child after Ruth, a little boy called John. And then we had a 9-year gap or something. We were trying to have another child. Obviously, we were open to life and everything, but nothing happened. And after Ruth died, we were praying and praying. So this is part of the way that God turns it all around. And, it was, I think very quickly we thought the only way we're going to survive this is if we have another child. Do you know what I mean? To sort of, I don't know, occupy. We knew it wouldn't be Ruth, but that was kind of the decision that we came to. But we hadn't had a child for years, and we'd been trying and tracking and all that sort of thing to give John a little brother or sister, but that hadn't happened. And then we went to, we tend to holiday in Malta, and we were on holiday. We went to this place that's really special to us called Tarpinu, which is the Marian Shrine on Gozo. And we were both praying at the altar there. And I've been through all kinds of emotions, but I think really what was going on was that I was really angry with God for what had happened in some way. And I wanted my daughter back. And that's my prayers were like, give me my daughter back, like, that's not what I was saying, but you can imagine that was like the feeling that was behind it all, that angry kind of feeling. But something inside me clicked on that day. And I just, I just felt like, Lord, I'm so blessed with my sons. If just like, if you could allow us to be parents again, I think it would be healing or whatever. And we came out, and I said to Lou, you know, what did you pray for? And, you know, she'd prayed a similar prayer, but she'd also asked that her cousin, who'd recently had a miscarriage, she said, I don't really want to fall pregnant if my cousin, you know, like, it's just painful and all that sort of thing. And so she talked to God about that. Anyway, when we got home, you know, 3 or 4 days later, Lou was pregnant, her cousin was pregnant. And then, you know, there's loads of others. Like, I mean, it was so miraculous. It's easy to say those things, but, you know, when you've been longing for something for so long, and for me, it was like, oh, right, that's because I said, I don't mind if it's a boy. You know, I'd stopped asking for Ruth to come back and just said, Lord, please, you know, bless us with life or whatever. And when we got back, we had the scan. Lou was, you know, this is 5 kids in. She was absolutely confident. She knew whether she was having a boy or a girl. You know, she knew the signs and when the sickness was and all that sort of thing. Absolutely convinced she was a boy. That made perfect theological sense or whatever to me. You know, that made absolute sense. And so we were going along with that. We went to the scan, and the sonologist said, oh, do you want to know whether it's a boy or a girl? And I said no. Lou said no. I said, yeah, absolutely. Anyway, Lou was like, well, can you definitely say? And she said, yeah. And then she said, oh, it's a girl. And the pair of us just broke into tears, you know, just absolutely crying our hearts out. The poor sonographer was like, oh, what's going on? There was rolls of blue roll and snot and, you know, all this everywhere. So that was 13 years ago. And we had a little girl called Mary. And she really is the absolute, you know, gift from heaven. She really is very, very loved, and she's incredibly important in our lives, but a real message from heaven, you know. Yeah. And I mean, there are other things like I really did like. I mean, I hate talking about it because it sounds crazy, but I had a vision of Ruth that only once, you know, you long to dream of your child who you've lost. But I'd never dreamt of her, but I had one night where I had this incredibly powerful and real sort of visitation, if you like. And it was at a point in this story where I was dying. I think I was dying from a broken heart. You know, I really just didn't know what to do. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't get up. I couldn't go to sleep. You know, it was just a disaster. And this was a good 6 months into the process or whatever, the grieving process. And she was like, she wasn't a child anymore, but I recognized it was her. It was, you know, the fullness of who she was, if you know what I mean. And she was playing hide and seek with me. And eventually we got to like this town square somewhere, and she sat me down at the table and she said, look, you've got to pull this together for the family. You know, the Father, you know, God the Father has got this. Everything's going to be okay. You've got to be strong enough. You've got to look after mummy, and you've got, you know, and it's choking me out just talking about, but it was transformative, you know. That was transformative because it gave me that teleology perhaps to know that this is the trajectory and that we're all going to be together in heaven. And my job now is to get us all there, if you like, you know.
Yeah, talk about a new mission in life, right? Like we all have to see her again.
Yeah. Exactly. Coming to greet us. And so all that theory perhaps that I'd learned from studying for 5 years or whatever, then it was all real. Yeah. Does that make any sense? And so now,
yeah, absolutely.
Since then I've lived my faith like it, not like it's some theoretical thing, or or maybe it's true or maybe it's not true. I know this is the reality. And so this is how I live.
It's one of those stories where we'll have to do a full episode with Mark to really get into this, because he summed it up in 5 minutes. But Mark gave this talk at the Catholic Identity Conference that, I mean, I was weeping listening to, yes, the heartbreak of losing your daughter, but these little miracles that God put in your life to bring you back to life, because you were dead inside, like you were essentially dead. And there's something about the way Christ comes into a broken heart that unless your heart is broken, it's almost like you can't really experience Christ's love fully until he can heal a broken heart like that. And Mark's story is one of those stories where you're weeping when you hear it told in full. And Catherine, yours was also a beautiful story. Like, you guys were the highlight of that conference for me. And it was because it was the first time I got to meet you guys in person. I was really excited to watch you guys, but you two both gave the most powerful stories that whole weekend. And I thought they were beautiful. I don't know if you want to share a little bit of yours also, Catherine.
I don't know. So there's lots of elements to my story. I think you're referring to, I'm trying to remember what I said, but I think you're probably referring to my experience with my mum when she was dying. So she was ill a lot throughout my life, suffered a great deal, and then finally was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and she died within 6 months. And so I nursed her through that time. And it's too easy to say immediately there was this bolt of lightning. You know, do you get bolts of lightning, or is that thunder? Well, anyway, yeah, lightning, yeah. So this bolt of something came, it sort of penetrated me, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't that simple. I think what it is I look at the trajectory of my life, and seeing where I am now, I look back at my mother's suffering and the way in which she took that on herself and offered it to Christ and offered it to the cross, and didn't plead to have it taken away, and didn't say, slip me an injection, and didn't complain and say, why me? She responded. Her faith, you know, she was a very devout woman, and she suffered greatly, but bore that suffering. And I don't think I really understood what it meant to bear suffering. And so I fell away from my faith and made some terrible choices, quite angry with God then in my 20s, just late teens, early 20s. And I led the kind of life that you see around you, which is I want to do what I want. You know, if this pleases me, if this makes me happy, then I'll do it. And who are you to say that I can't? If I enjoy going to a party, getting drunk, taking drugs, whatever, then, and it's bringing me happiness, then I'll pursue it. And what I think now as an adult with my own children is I want to try and point to the absolute fact that you cannot make choices without consequences. You cannot think that you can escape those consequences. I'm maybe being a bit cryptic, but what I'm trying to say is you can either bear the consequence yourself, or you can pass that on to others. So one of the things then during this time is I met my husband, and he already had children. And at the time of our coming together, their parents weren't together, but it wasn't, you know, possibly they might have been if nothing prevented them. And we said, it's no bother, you know, this is what we want. We want to be together. It doesn't matter. He's got 3 kids. We want to be together. And we justified it and said, well, this is good for them. You know, this will be good for them. It's great when people love each other, and even if it's not their parents, this is better for them. And now what I've come to realize in the years since, this is a very hard lesson, is by in that instance, by pursuing what we want, by saying we want this and we will take it because this is for our benefit, we pass the cost onto our children, those we love most. We pass there's no escaping that. Like, no matter how the world lies to you, you pass that cost and those consequences onto those that you love the most. So we force brokenness into each of them, and then we have our own family, and you think, oh, it's okay because we've got our intact family, but it's never intact because they've got half siblings and they've got step siblings, and there's a brokenness that runs at the heart of our family through our choice. And so then I think, okay, well, I look back at my mum, and the correct response is, don't just do what you want. Don't just say, put me out of my misery, or let me, you know, it's let me accept this, let me bear the cost of this so that it can bring wholeness. So the wholeness I have in my life is thanks to the choices of my parents or my mum to bear that rather than force that onto others. So the reason I was talking about this is because I talk a lot with young people about abortion, about IVF, about adultery, about murder, about sin. And they often say to me, but surely it doesn't matter because IVF's great because you get babies and you love them and God's created them. And abortion's okay because what if you've been raped? And what I tried to impart, and this is through my experience, and none of that's a good thing. That's all terrible what I've just shared with you. But I'm not trying to glorify it or make it justify it. But what I've learned through it is I don't want my own children to suffer, to place that suffering on others. So when you have an abortion because you want to live a life free of the burden or whatever, you are placing that cost onto another human, the child, and you are killing them. When you have IVF because you want children, you are placing that cost onto the frozen embryos because you want it. Understandably, you want it. But that's, and when you commit adultery and you say, but this is in our best interests and we want to do this and it makes us happy, you are placing that brokenness forever onto existing children. Now, there is no escaping that. And the Christian response is to say, I will bear that suffering. I will go without what I think I want. As hard as it is, as a mother trying to conceive, if I can't, I will accept that suffering as hard as it is. If I get pregnant through some awful circumstance, or as a teenage girl who got no money, I will try and bear that. You know, it goes back to suffering and sin. And Mark's just spoken about suffering, is through the taking that cost and that burden onto ourselves. That is Christ-like. That's saying no. But then we when we avoid that and we say no, it's fine. I can just pursue it this way. I can just do whatever I want. It will come back to bite you. And so what I want to say to my kids is, you can do that. You're free to do that. You're adults. If you want to go out in life, hook up, have abortions, seek IVF, commit adultery, do whatever, I'm not going to be able to stop you. But as a loving mother, it would be wrong to pretend to you that this is not going to lead to consequences that are beyond your control. So to love you is to share this with you and to say, I've been there and I know what it's like. And because of that, I can prevent you. Well, you know, it's like God in scripture. He's like, come on, guys, don't do this. And they say, no, God, we're going to do this. And it's fine because we're your people and you'll never abandon us. And he's like, well, you know, maybe not, but you do have to learn and you can't escape that. So maybe that's a muddled. So I think maybe I brought it back to my mum. It's like, only then did I finally see, wow, like my eyes were opened, that my whole life, my mum had suffered in many ways, not just physical health, but suffered with putting up with burdens in her in-laws and in her family and all sorts of things. She just suffered over and over again. And she just never tried to put the cost on someone else. She always just said, I accept it, God. And through that choice, it's brought me healing and wholeness. Her, who she loves most, she's brought healing and wholeness. And that's what we can do for our children. And it's not too late. It's not too late, because now I can say with my husband, we bring this all before you, Lord. We place our family at your feet. Make us whole again.
First off, that was unbelievably vulnerable that you shared all that. Like, thank you so much for that. Because I think there's a tendency to try, especially when people do what we do, is try to present our lives as if we have these perfect lives, and nobody's lives are perfect, and we're all broken, like very broken, and we all have some very, you know, deep trauma throughout our lives. But just the fact that what I was even saying with Mark, like there's no way for Christ to really break through unless you are vulnerable and you do have a broken heart. And when you have a broken heart, that is when God really can intervene and heal some of the messes in our lives. For me, when I Mark and you both talking about being angry with God, like when I was before that crucifix, I was furious with him. Like I was angry because my marriage was falling apart. And there was this period where I had to go and stay with my mom because me and my wife couldn't even have a conversation together. And I think those prayers, when you're angry at God and you're just so deeply upset because you tried to do everything the way he said and it just didn't go perfectly, that it makes us angry with him. But those are the times where he actually can answer. It's like Paul talks about, like when you, from the depth of your heart, you cry out, Abba, Father. Like those are the times where God really can intervene in your life and show you that he can actually put together some of these broken pieces.
I so believe that, Anthony. It's like, I always think it's like Jacob at the Jabberwock, isn't it? Wrestling with God. And that's what we do. That's what our lives are. We don't understand a lot of the time how this works in our life, but I think God appreciates the wrestling. He wants us to, he wants us to be passionate about getting it right and to do our best. And it doesn't mean that we won't fall down or that we won't get it wrong and mess up. But that's the brilliant thing about it, is that there's always redemption, But like Catherine says, like it's such a beautiful thing for Christmas, really, is that our choices have consequences, and that's, as parents, we have to try and transmit that to our children, that, yeah, look, that's not freedom. It doesn't work like that. We've got to this point where we think that freedom means that we can do whatever we want to do, don't we? But there are consequences, and society is constantly telling us that there aren't. If you get old, we'll just kill you or send you off to a home, or if you get pregnant, you can have an abortion. Do whatever you want to do, and that's not real life.
And it's it lies to. It's a lie. It's a lie. And the thing is, I remember what those lies were like. And I was talking with Mark earlier, saying deep down, and I think it was deep, all through those early 20s, I knew that the choices I was making were bad, but I masked them. So the more I felt I was making a bad choice, the more I would look for things to justify, scientific evidence or cultural things that, whatever it was, this will make me happy, utilitarian thinking, whatever it was. And then I'd think, I'll bury it. And then maybe I'll take something that will help me bury it. Yeah. But then at some point, maybe the darkest point, and this is Christmas, so again, God penetrates in the darkness, something broke through, and I had to, it's so embarrassing. Like you say, vulnerable. It's a terrible thing, to be humbled, because to realize all you've done, to be humbled to the point of saying, oh my gosh, I now have to live with the consequences of accepting that all these choices were bad choices that have left ongoing consequences that can't just be brushed away. Let's pretend they never happened. Is fierce. And so a world that tells young people, don't worry about it. It's just so awful. And that's why we spend so much of our show, don't we, Mark, saying, because the problem is, it can sound like preaching, like, oh, who do you think you are? It's love. It's I love you. I love you, viewer. I love you, children. I love you. And because I love you and God loves you and you're made by love for love, you're worth so much more than these lies that you're being told.
Yeah, it comes with a little bit of wisdom from people who are a little like we're a little bit older, and we're talking to younger people sometimes. And like when you're young, you don't even realize the things you're doing in the moment. But then you kind of look back on your life in hindsight and you just see some of the selfish choices you make, and they really do have consequences, and they do affect other people, and you can leave a wake of damage in your selfishness. So it's like there's some things that I've done in my life where if me now could go back and talk to the younger me, I'd want to like smack him in the face and be like, what are you doing? But at the same time, those are the things that form our relationships with God. And it's just, he really is the light that comes into the darkest places of our lives. So I do want to take you guys over to locals for a little bit. So if you guys, this segment probably should have been on locals. there's still plenty to talk about over there. So we're gonna put the rest behind the local stream. First off, you guys, I think you guys are the only other like team that does this. Like, I think everybody else kind of does their solo thing, but you guys are like the UK version of us, where you guys are a team, and there's a aspect of relationship that goes into these scenarios where they're hard. Like there's times where Rob wants to strangle me. There's times where I get annoyed with Rob, and I'm sure you two get under each other's skin at times. But that you work through those things and you keep the friendship going, and you're like, you know what, let's just keep doing this because there's a joy about being friends and continuing in this stuff. So you guys are, you know, I try not to overly flatter people, but you guys see I'm in your chat every time you do a live show. I try to catch everything you guys do. I really do love what you guys do. I think you guys have great chemistry together, and I really do appreciate both of your friendships. So thank you for joining us over here. We're going to stick around. We're going to go to the other side, but thank you both.
Thank you.
Do you want them to promote?
Oh yeah, let's plug your stuff, obviously. All right, so if you guys aren't
So we've got
already,
a couple of t-shirts. We got I'm kidding.
Well, first and foremost, go over and subscribe to the Catholic Unscripted Substack and their YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, just catholicunscripted.com is the website. But yeah, we post something pretty much every day.
You guys are supposed to be pumping yourselves up right
No,
now.
we don't. Yeah, you go over there. You go over to YouTube and you join us, and then go to.
Well, and we've got a couple of we've got a number of priests actually who write stuff for us. We've got Father Pascal does a daily gospel reading and reflection. You get every day if you're a subscriber. Father Sean Sheehy, the famous priest who got sacked by his bishop for preaching the catechism in Kerry. Do you remember that story? He writes regularly for us. And we've also got Sean Walsh, who's a philosophy professor, picking apart metaphysics and that sort of thing.
I like Sean. I like the episodes you guys do with him.
He's really good. So yeah, so there's a great variety of stuff, cultural stuff, but some deep theology as well. And we try and relate to what's going on in the culture. So anyone wants to subscribe, we'd really appreciate that. Yeah.
All right, guys. So go check out Catholic Unscripted. I would like to ask these two about some of the backlash they caught from some things and I'd like to get into why they catch backlash and we don't. So we'll see. We're going to go over to the other side and we'll get into some of the stuff we can't talk about over here. Everybody, if you're not a Locals member, Rob put the link up in there for you if you guys want to come and see the rest of the show. All right, take us out, Rob.
Any minute now, Rob.
No, he's doing it. He's killing the stream.